guys, welcome to my channel. This is Jay from Coding with Jaybird, where I upload weekly tutorials to help build your confidence in coding. Today we're going to learn about the JavaScript math object. Let's start coding, shall we? I've opened my math object project folder in Visual Studio Code. Let's go ahead and put our logic in our main.js file. So we're going to talk a little bit about the math object and what it is today. The math object is a global object, and we can use the name math followed by the property or methods that we want to access. So the first one we're going to talk about is math.py. So what we can do is we can actually just write math.py and we can access the value 3.14159 and so on. So that's our mathematical value of pi. So let's console log that. So I'm just going to say math to access the math object dot pi. And when I save that, you can see there's the value of pi. So using this math object, we can actually do a lot of mathematical calculations fairly easily in JavaScript. So let's go ahead and implement a simple area calculation. So let area equal math.pi. And I'm just going to say times 2 times 2. Now this could be a variable in the case of some larger example, but for simplicity I'm just going to say pi times r squared, and r will just be a value of 2. And then we can console log this area. And we can get the value of 12.566 and so on. Now that's not a very pretty value, so we can actually round it as well by using what's called the math.round method. So what is the math.round method? The math.round function returns the value of a number rounded to the nearest integer. So if I say let area rounded equal, and again I'll access the math object dot round function, and in the function I'll pass in this variable that we created, area. And then when I log this to the console, we'll see a rounded value of 13. So it's rounded it to its nearest integer, and 12.56 rounds up to 13. Now there's some other math properties and functions that we can talk about. One is called the math floor. So in order to demonstrate this, let's create a variable with an average value. So we'll say let average equal 86.7273, and I will log this to the console. And we can see that value, 86.7273. And now I'll demonstrate the math.floor method. So the math.floor function, what it does is it returns the largest integer that's less than or equal to the number that we pass in. So let's practice this. So we'll say let average floor equal math.floor, and here we'll pass in that average. And then when we log this to the console, and we save it, we see that it rounded it down to 86. And that's because the math.floor function returns the largest integer that's less than the value that we have. So the next integer below 86.7 is 86. Similarly, we have a math.ceil. And this math.ceil function always rounds a number up to the next largest integer. So if we passed in that same average, so let's say let average ceiling equal math.ceil, and we pass in average, what do you think we'll get? Well, let's see. If you guessed 87, you're right. It's going to round it up to the next largest integer. Okay, next I want to demonstrate another function, and it's called the math.round function. So what does a math.round function do? Well, it returns a floating point value, and this value is going to be between 0 and 1, but it doesn't include 1. So it's going to be between 0 and 0.999 and so on. So let's go ahead and demonstrate this. I'm going to create a variable called random number, and I'm going to set that to math.random. And then I'm going to log this to the console to see what value do I get. and we're getting 0.7064. Now, if I reload the page, we'll get a different value, 0.755. Now I'll reload it again, 0.275, and so on. So every time we reload the page, this math.random function is populating a new random value between 0 and 1, but not inclusive of 1. Okay, next I'd like to demonstrate the math.square-root function. So using the math object, we'll say math.sqrt for square root, and we're going to pass in a value. Now the math square root function returns the square root of a number that we pass in. So let's say I'm going to make a variable. I'll just call it square root for simplicity, and I'll say square root equals math.square root function, and I'm going to pass in the value 9. And if we log this to the console, what do you think we'll get? Well, the square root of 9 is 3, and there you can see 3. Perfect, it looks great. Now I want to cover one more math function, and that's called the math.pow function, which takes two values, x and y. Now the math.pow function is basically a power function, and what it does is it takes two arguments, the x and the y, and the x is the base and the y is the exponent, and it basically takes x to the power of y and returns a result. So let's demonstrate this with some variable which we'll call power num equals math.pow, and we'll pass in two values. Let's say 2 for our base and 4 for the exponent. Now what would 2 to the power of 4 give us? Let's have a look. We'll console log power num, and we'll save it, and we'll get 16, because 2 to the power of 4 is 16. Now as you can see, the math object is fantastic. It makes life so much easier in JavaScript. We can rather quickly come up with some calculations and implement our JavaScript logic using this math object. That's it for today's video on the math object. I hope you've enjoyed watching this video. If you have, please don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button so I can make more videos for you in the weeks to come. Until next week, keep on coding.